This program is brought to you by Pussy Magnets.
Put a midge on your fridge with a pussy magnet.
Welcome, my lovely lumps. Or should I say lovely labs? I'm so thrilled to have you here in the Labia Lounge. We're going to yarn about all things sexuality, womanhood, relationships, intimacy, holistic health, and everything in between. Your legs. Ooh, can't help myself. Anyway, we're going to have vag loads of real chats with real people about real shit. So buckle up, you're about to receive the sex ed that you never had and have a bloody good laugh while you're at it. Before we dive in, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm recording this, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. It's an absolute privilege to be living and creating dope podcast content in Naarm, and I pay respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. Now, if you're ready, let's flap and do this. Oh my God, is there such thing as too many vagina jokes in the one intro? Whatever, it's my podcast. I'm leaving it in.
Don't panic, you're not broken. Your sex education was a piece of shit. Get your flaps out and pull up a couch. It's the Labia Lounge.
Hey gang, just before we jump into this episode, I wanted to offer you an opportunity to access my new mini course for free before I start charging for it in future. It's for people with vulvas and it's quick to complete. It's all about demystifying the female body and pleasure anatomy and getting some basic fundamentals to understand your body better. It's called Pussy Pleasure Secrets, Your Roadmap to Bedroom Bliss. You can grab it on the freebies page of my website or in the show notes. It's a great little free resource to kind of dip your toe in or act as a bit of a taster for my work. So if you've ever been curious about this sort of thing and you just don't know where to start, or you want a really quick, easy, accessible, non-threatening way to get the ball rolling and start working on this stuff, this is a great place to start. Hello, my darling labial lovers. Welcome back to the lounge. This epi will be learning about PMDD, what it is, what that stands for, how it works in the body, the impact it can have on relationships with others and ourselves, and how to treat it holistically. And I've got a super knowledgeable expert ready to dive into this with me too. So we're incredibly lucky to be plumbing the depths of this guest's expertise in a minute. I'd like to introduce you all to Brett. Oh my God, I asked you 2 seconds ago how to pronounce your last name. Is it? Oh, can
It's
you remind me?
Buchert.
Buchert.
Yes.
Okay. I've literally got at the top of my notes in bold, all caps, don't forget to ask how to pronounce her last name, because I always do. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you're probably like, oh my God, for fuck's sake, Freya. It happens like more often than not. And I did actually remember to ask you, and then I forgot.
You did.
Anyway, life of a podcast host is just trying to keep too many things in your head at once. Anyway, I've got Brett, who's the co-creator of Me, the PMDD, the first ever PMDD symptom tracking app, and Unraveling Cycles, the companion menstrual health education platform. After personally healing from PMDD, Brett now helps others do the same through cycle awareness, somatic practices, and holistic strategies. With 10 years experience in the mental health, menstrual health field and serving on the International PMDD Community Coalition, Brett is passionate about supporting women to unravel from the pain of symptoms and reclaim the power of their cycles. Awesome. I'm so excited to chat with you, Brett. Welcome to the Labia Lounge.
Thank you. I'm excited too.
So I suppose, like, first things first, for those who haven't heard of PMD, perhaps for those who have a friend who has it or a partner, let's just talk about what it is so people can understand the basics and how it kind of shows up. And then we can get into the different approaches for treatment and maybe some causal factors, things like that. But could you please give us a rundown on what PMDD is and how it affects some people with their menstrual cycle?
Yeah. So PMDD stands for Premenstrual Dysphoria Disorder. And I consider it a mental health, menstrual health kind of condition, kind of bridging both those arenas which can partially be why it's like challenging to get a diagnosis or to get support for it, because it's like, whose domain does this even fall in? So it kind of falls into several. So it affects women in their reproductive years, between puberty and menopause. And not just women, anyone who has cycles who maybe doesn't identify as woman. And the symptoms it causes are depression, anxiety, irritability, or anger, even rage, emotional changes, mood swings, sensitivity to rejection, brain fog, fatigue, can be feelings of worthlessness or hopelessness, even thoughts of suicide, and physical symptoms too. And these symptoms would happen in the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle. So after ovulation, before your period starts again. So it's that 2 weeks potentially. And then it would potentially stop during your period or after it. And as you can probably tell by the list of symptoms, it can be very severe and debilitating and affecting, every area of life. And it's something I had since I was 11 or 12 when I was going through puberty, and didn't actually understand what was going on until about like 10 years later when I was in my early 20s.
Wow. That is such a massive list of symptoms or potential symptoms, and also such an enormous amount of time to spend menstruating and feeling like you're completely fucking crazy before you actually had any answers or explanation for what was going on. And I know several people with this who have only been diagnosed, whether that's like by a medical professional or through just learning about it themselves and self-diagnosing and going, oh my God, this actually makes so much sense given my experience for the last 10, 20 years. But most of the people I know that are being diagnosed are like in their 30s. And so they have been living with this, or potentially masking the symptoms by being on the pill or some sort of hormonal contraception for like their whole adult life to this point. And all of a sudden they want to have children or something. And, their relationships, once they go off the pill, once they start, cycling sort of naturally again, their relationships are falling apart because they are having these incredibly intense symptoms, and it's just devastating. And I'm curious, like, how common is this? And like, what is the kind of, and I don't know, maybe there's not a definitive answer to this, but what's the sort of average time it takes to get a diagnosis? Because I know that for things like endometriosis, the average time to get a diagnosis is something fucking mental, like 8 years, even though it's incredibly common because well, I'm not even going to get into that. I'm not going to start bashing the Western medical system, but it's really, really unfair that it takes so long for women to be listened to and have their pain and their symptoms taken seriously. So I'm curious, like, is there a similar thing going on with PMDD and diagnosis?
Yeah, I would say it's very similar to kind of the endo experience in the diagnosis realm, is that it's affecting about 5% of women. So that's 1 in 20 women.
Wow.
And the best research on getting a diagnosis, it takes like 12 years. That was a study done in like
Whoa.
2018 that I was a part of kind of putting together with other groups. And I just think that's insane. And it's reflected in my own experience. And when I think about that, of my experience and my friends who have this and colleagues, it's like, what is just the core experience of our cycles, like how this impacts us with symptoms, and what is all those years of not knowing what's going on, not knowing that other women are experiencing this and there's things you can do. So I'm curious how, through more awareness, it might shift the whole experience of PMDD over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then that's kind of why it's great that there are resources like podcasts, like, social media accounts and stuff that are spreading awareness. And there's like a whole nother level of kind of advocacy and activism that can occur now because of the internet and social media, which is great. That is one of the sort of positive aspects of that. Because yeah, like when when we were young, there would have just been no way to figure this shit out. And it was even more stigmatized to talk about things like periods and hormones. So, kind of like in line with what you were just saying around, you know, how it might affect things if there's more awareness. Do you think that do you think PMDD has become more common in recent years due to, I guess, like what would they be? Like sociocultural um, factors or other factors? Like, I don't know how to phrase this question, but has it become more common in modern times because of the way we're sort of living in such an unnatural way that's, really encouraging disconnect from our bodies and our cycles and bypassing symptoms by taking more pharmaceuticals and rejecting our body's natural cyclical nature because it's seen as weak or, just a crazy hormonal woman? Like, is there any correlation there, do you think? This is just me like riffing.
Yeah. Well, I think absolutely. And I don't think research yet reflects that. So that might not be in the kind of evidence base that people might look at. But in my experience, I think that's totally implicated. Just the kind of modern wet pressures on women, both to be feminine and honor ourselves, but then also to be like a boss and never show that we're weak and be the same as men. I think women can do what men can do in many capacities, but it's not in the same way. So I think that's kind of a complicated way of living now. And then, like you say, of not honoring a natural way of living and wanting to change any experience and put a pill on it and all of that. And I think a part of this cyclical experience that all women has is it's our way of like growing and learning and healing wounds. And I think that we have a tendency to just want to kind of get rid of that discomfort. And PMDD is wrapped up in that. But it's certainly a super severe experience and it warrants like care and attention. So it's a little sensitive area too.
And I imagine there's not really a whole lot of data on the rates of PMDD, 50 years ago compared to now or something like that. Because is it kind of new that people are even aware of this or studying this?
Yeah, the diagnosis itself, like PMDD, was officially put in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is like in the US, kind of the Bible of mental health conditions. It was only put in there in 2013 in the official text.
Oh,
It was in like the appendix for a decade or so before, and then it had a slightly different name. And I think it only got introduced in like the 80s. And that came with like a lot of drama in and of itself. But there is an element of once we put a name to these things that we can study them better and understand them. And so we have got to take all we know about PMDD with kind of a grain of salt that it is super new. And personal experiences will kind of precede the evidence that hopefully will come in these years ahead.
Yeah, totally. As far as you know, can you develop it at any time throughout your sort of menstruating career, or do you generally start noticing symptoms as soon as you start menstruating?
From what I hear from others, it can develop at any time. For me, it was right at the start, kind of. But also, there are more sensitive times, like following the postpartum period. That can be a time when PMDD might develop, or you might associate with it being PMDD. Also, when kind of perimenopause shifts things, a lot of women can feel like that's when it comes online. Like maybe they had a PMS experience, and now it's like, oh, this is way more severe as they're reaching those years. Also, hormonal treatments like hormonal birth control, like coming off of it, switching around, it really does like throw the whole hormonal system and our whole system as humans off in a big way. And so then you might develop these symptoms or realize them after kind of returning to natural cycling.
Yeah. Okay. So it sort of sounds like sometimes it can just be there from the get-go, and then other times maybe there's kind of causal or like contributing factors that have already messed with our cycles and our hormones, like, being on hormonal contraception or something like that, or, a transitional phase like perimenopause that almost sort of like triggers it into action.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think of like the amount of overlapping or just different conditions that could be mistaken for PMDD. Like, I feel as though it's just one of these things which is so tricky, and probably why it takes so long to diagnose, because the symptoms could be just mistaken for, like, I know people have thought, oh my God, like, do I have borderline personality disorder? Do I have bipolar? Do I have like just like really sort of manic depression? Do I just have really bad PMS? Are there like common conditions that are often mistaken with PMDD, or like maybe even overlap or contribute?
Mm-hmm. I think you named them: the borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety. Like, yes, they all overlap so much. And personally, I was really in the camp of like, oh, we need to find this definitive diagnosis for what's affecting me. That was how I felt previously. But now I kind of do see it as like, we're just having these experiences as people, and the diagnosis we get should be a tool towards treatment or management or whatever we do. And so I don't even feel that the distinction necessarily is so important, though I do think knowing that there's a cyclical component in someone's experience is huge. So that's when something like PMDD is different from all those other experiences, which
Yeah.
don't tie it to the cycle, even though probably a
Yeah.
lot of women who relate more with those diagnoses probably do have a cyclical component. There's also like
Yeah. Yeah.
premenstrual exacerbation is like a
Totally.
term in the literature of just having a different condition or symptoms getting exacerbated in those
Yeah.
premenstrual time.
Yeah, of course. Like, it makes so much sense, when your hormones are changing, that will, of course, affect your mood and potentially like aggravate an
Mm-hmm.
existing, you know, challenge like depression or anxiety, for instance. Um, So, as far as I understand, and I don't really know that much about it, and like you said, it's so new. We have to take everything with a grain of salt because there isn't heaps of research on this. But I was chatting with a friend a while back who was diagnosed, and she was sort of explaining her understanding of it as the doctor had described, and it sounded like what was going on was a heightened sensitivity to hormonal fluctuations compared with like how, the average person will be able to ride the waves of those hormonal changes. Is that the crux of what's actually happening to create those really intense symptoms? Is that when our hormones shift a little bit, if you have PMDD, you are just intensely sensitive to that shift and therefore get like way, way, way bigger symptoms? Like, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the best explanation we have so far. And I think it does line up with my experience and what I see in other women, that it's the sensitivity to the changes in the hormones, not necessarily
Yeah.
like the hormones being out of balance, which I think is what a lot of us might commonly think of when we think of a hormone related issue, but really it's
Yeah.
just sensitivity to those changes. But what I've learned through my own experience and hearing from others is that I don't think it's just the hormones are changing and then automatically we get like a symptom of depression. It doesn't like necessarily work that directly. And I think there's like a lot in between that sensitivity that I might have more so than a woman who will never have a PMDD experience. But there's like a space between. And I think that kind of gets into our kind of more sociocultural attitudes towards women and ourselves and our menstrual cycles and having emotions, mental health considerations. And so that's where I'm at with that kind of causing factor.
Mm. What do you mean by a space in between? Like, say more on that, because I haven't experienced PMDD and I haven't had to try to manage the symptoms or overcome that. Like, I'd love to just go a bit deeper into that.
Yeah. So we have this heightened sensitivity. but then it's not directly turning into a symptom. That's what happens with our cycle. Like all women do experience changes in our moods and our thoughts and how we behave and how we relate to the world and how we feel about ourselves. And a lot of women can ride that. Maybe we get a little bit of sadness or whatever comes up through being alive, but it can get kind of amplified if you have PMDD. And we interpret those things through our own kind of subconscious beliefs and our beliefs about ourselves, about how the world works. And I think that's what we don't always notice, that everything we're experiencing is being interpreted on a subconscious level. And it's interpreted as like danger, as wrong, as bad, as a notion that we're broken or messed up. And for myself, when I started to kind of unravel that and see that it wasn't just so cut and dry as I believed, there was a place to work there, and to realize that the changes I was experiencing with my cycle at a base level that are normal and that are physiologically supportive to like what the cycle is doing, that when I could see that those changes were actually okay and that I could get through them and they didn't need to develop into these kind of full-blown symptom experiences, that things got better over time through that.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So it's the classic thing around how we feel about how we feel is actually more important than the original feeling. It's how we interpret and digest and integrate those feelings and like the meaning that we make about them. And that is so influenced by society, culture, like the conversations happening around us, the way that womanhood or femininity or periods or hormonal fluctuations or mood swings are talked about, and therefore what we make them mean about us as a person, as a woman. Yeah, and we grew up in such a sort of femme negative, body negative, period negative kind of environment. Okay, I see where we're getting into the territory that I want to get to later around like how do we actually sort of tackle this, and what are some like contributing factors or risk factors. But before we go there in a bit more depth, I'd love to just sort of like shoehorn in the segment Get Pregnant and Die.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die. Don't have sex in the missionary position. Don't have sex standing up. Just don't do it, promise?
And so this is where I ask all of my guests if they have a story or anecdote about their sex education to share with us. It doesn't have to be a negative one. It could be like how it failed you, or it could be how sex ed or a person in your life at that, pivotal time really like helped you with some key advice or wisdom.
Yeah, I've been excited about this question because in my investigation into PMDD, I did some surveys of women in the community about their sex ed. I was like, what was it like? Like, was yours as horrible as mine? That kind of thing. And it was so reflected. Like, I mean, I think that's just common nowadays. So yeah, mine was, it was called the 5th grade class was what we called it, because it was done in 5th grade. But I also did that at school and then also at my church at the time. And I feel like that might sound like, ooh, okay, that might be tough. And my poor parents, they were just like, we want her to learn about sex in like a loving, like not dominated by the crazy external culture. But it did give an attitude of more shame and also really preaching the abstinence aspect. And I was like, I don't know, 11 or 12 at this time. I was like a kid. And they're like, you should sign this contract that says you're never going to have sex until marriage. And that's like, I feel like it's fine if you do choose to do that, like with your own like sexuality. But as a little girl, I was like, what? Like, I barely even knew what sex was. And now I'm supposed to make a defining decision for my life. And it like contributes to like, if I go to heaven and stuff, like,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
So that was intense.
Oh, whoa. I've heard about these contracts, like, the purity culture, abstinence first type of sex ed. But I don't know if maybe I've had one guest on here that's signed one of those. But yeah, I haven't really heard of many people who have had to actually sign like on the dotted line. And I think it's so much more prevalent in America than Australia. So I've, managed to dodge that. But that is just intense. Like, as an
Yeah.
11-year-old, basically, like having to sign something, you don't know that that's not legally binding. And, for all it's like, it's heavenly binding. It's like you will
Hmm.
either go to hell or heaven based on if you like adhere to this contract that you're signing before you've even gone through puberty, talking about something you fully don't understand and you can't make decisions on because you're not there yet. Like, that's so crazy. When you like did get to an age where your peers maybe were engaging in sex, whether, you were like contemplating it or not, like, did you remember that contract and did that really impact your decisions around whether to be sexual with people or not as you developed?
It haunted me for a long time, like in those early teen years, like before I was kind of
Yeah.
more considering, sex and all that. Um, but yeah, just like so much anxiety and worrying about this
Mm.
contract because I didn't sign it and I was like questioning, like, should I have? Like, where is the contract? Like, I didn't sign it yet.
Whoa.
It was just not right for my kind of personality type and how I see things like that.
So when you were offered to sign it and you didn't sign it, did you get like judgment or get in trouble for that? Or did you like what happened when you refused?
Not really. I think even like setting this all up, like my church was actually quite progressive as far as churches
Oh.
go, and my parents were very like open. It was just like me. And I think that's what's troubling is that like I interpreted what the church was saying to me in my own little 11-year-old
Mm.
head, and it's like
Mm.
that was where the trouble was. Like it was between like me and God, and
Mm.
that's tough when
Whoa.
you're little.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, I guess that's like part of the mechanism that makes it so effective is like whether you sign that or not, the message gets across in your little like mind when it's it's such a formative time that like whether you sign it or not, like if you I mean the message is that abstinence before marriage is the way to go, and if you don't follow that, you know that's sinful. So it's like if you signed it and you broke it, you'd be fucked. And if you didn't sign it, oh wow, well what does that say? And then, even if you didn't sign it and you still had sex before marriage, your education around that has been like, oh well, you can't get into heaven now and that's bad. So it was effective for what they were trying to do, which was to stop you from having sex before marriage, regardless, which is kind of wild.
Hmm.
Um, I can't imagine that. Yeah, like haunted is such a good way to describe the way that, especially when you're so young and your world's quite small and, you haven't got the life experience yet and stuff. And we're so desperate to belong and to do the right thing and to be good people. And, you're just pretty lost. I feel like I was pretty lost when I was young.
Hmm.
Like it's wild thinking, yeah, that this thing was kind of hanging over your head because I remember the tiniest things I would just play over in my head again and again and again. It would just keep me up at night. And they were such tiny, meaningless little things, like little interactions that happened where I just felt like I'd fucked it up and I wasn't cool, or I'd embarrassed myself, or I could have said something a bit funnier, or, oh, did I hurt that person's feelings? And I would just like ruminate on that and fixate on that for ages, ages and ages, because as a child, like we're so sensitive and impressionable and we don't have as much other shit going on to distract us. So like that kind of stuff does really haunt you. Yeah, wow, crazy. Thank you
Hmm.
for that story.
I did like get over it kind of thing. It doesn't haunt me now, but
Great.
this was part of my PMDD healing to think of like, wow, that was what was happening when I was like starting my cycle and when I was learning about
Yeah.
like sex, which is the menstrual cycle is implicated in kind of the sexual cycle. And it's like,
Hmm.
oh, no wonder why. Like, that's a complicated
Totally.
relationship I had with my my cycle, my sexuality, like all of that. And I think my story might be somewhat unique, but we all have these things. That's why you ask it in your question, because it's kind of a uniting experience for people in our age.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I imagine when you did the survey and you're asking people with PMDD about their sex ed, like, and this, you can't necessarily kind of come to any conclusions from this because basically everyone had a shocking sex ed, whether they had PMDD or not. But did you notice that there was like definitely like a correlation or a lot of people with PMDD that had, a pretty rough time with their sex ed and potentially still some unresolved like beliefs or attitudes or narratives around that were potentially influencing, how they felt today about their cycle and their bodies? Hey, baby babes. Sorry to interrupt. I just had to pop my head into the lounge here and mention another virtual lounge that I'd love you to get around. It's the Labia Lounge Facebook group that I've created for listeners of the poddy to mingle in. There you'll find extra bits and bobs like freebies, behind the scenes, or discounts for offerings from guests who have been interviewed on the podcast. There'll also be, hopefully, inspiring, thought-provoking conversations and support from a community of labial legends like yourself. My vision for this is that it becomes a really supportive, educational, and hilarious resource for you to have more access to me and a safe space to ask questions you can't ask anywhere else. So head over to the links in the show notes or look up the Labia Lounge group in Facebook, and I'll see you in there. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah, I definitely don't think these experiences are unique to PMDD women, but yeah, there was so many people talking about the separating the boys and the girls thing, which I don't know if that's what they did in yours, but that was kind of standard, at least in America, which is maybe good because we do have different biology, but it's kind of this idea that like we're separate and that the boys don't know the same things we do. This is a women's issue for us alone, which I mean, I think comes down the line to how things like this, how periods and cycles are handled in relationship. So there was that element, and then a lot of embarrassment about our periods and cycles, really focused on the hygiene aspect and this discreetness, that this is private, and also not about how your cycle might affect you mentally and emotionally in kind of a normal context. That yes, when it's like leading to symptoms of like thoughts of suicide, like yes, that's not normal, that needs attention, but just that it's normal to change with your cycle emotionally and mentally. And I don't think that was really taught to many of us outside of a context of like PMS, which I think it goes beyond that. It's normal to change. That's what it is to be women, to be feminine beings. So yeah, that was really reflected in the surveys.
Yeah. Ugh, yeah. Splitting up the genders, I feel like it seems really innocuous and it seems to make sense. And also, I really disagree with it. I think like all of us should be learning about what all the genders go through. And imagine if like, the boys in our classes had learned about periods and all of these sort of bodily functions of people with vaginas, and then how that would have impacted like hetero relationships when, a guy was dating a girl and she had her period and he actually had an understanding of it and he wasn't freaked out. It wasn't taboo. It wasn't like she had to, feel as though it was just on her to keep it private and be discreet. If it was just out in the open and everyone kind of understood, and we understood what guys go through with like penises and wet dreams and whatever else. Like, I think it's just, a bit of a shame that the genders are split up for that kind of thing, because that's just inherently shaming in a way. It's like, it's not okay. It's not okay to like let the people of the other gender like know about what goes on in your body. And I don't know, it just like makes more stigma and mystery where it doesn't need to be. But anyway, So what are some of the kind of known causes, or if there aren't known causes, maybe some like contributing factors, risk factors for PMDD? Like how much of it is genetic? or how much of it is, just a physiological thing going on causing that sensitivity to hormonal fluctuations and it's just out of our control, and how much of it is actually influenced, like you were kind of talking about, by like lifestyles and sex education and stress and how society, functions and its demands on women and our nervous systems and how we treat our bodies throughout the cycle, whether we honor our cyclical needs, like all of that sort of stuff. Is it a combo? Are there some clear correlations? Like, what do we know about this? And what have you discovered anecdotally as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would focus that it is genetic, and I think that it has shown to be heritable from, like, if a mother has PMDD, potentially her daughter will have PMDD. But to me, that doesn't necessarily say it's genetic. I mean, the mother raises her daughter in such a way, kind of passes on that like generational trauma issues.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the hormone sensitivity is probably the genetic component, that's like just the way I'm wired, and that maybe another woman isn't. Research is showing that it's like issues with the neurotransmitters potentially. But to me, I don't think that's the why this is happening. I think it's just exposing like what is happening, like how the body is reacting to hormone changes. And another thing that's implicated in research is trauma, the relationship between trauma and PMDD. And actually, for myself, when I first learned about this, it felt a little invalidating because I'm not a person that associated with having like huge, big traumas as a young kid, which I think certainly people do. But then through my own investigation, it's like, oh, trauma doesn't necessarily have to be all these horrendous experiences. It can be the smaller things that just make an impact us and change how we think about things and ourselves. So trauma is related a lot, often sexual trauma, which I think really tracks because the menstrual cycle is related to our sexuality, be that, sexual abuse or violence or the attitudes we learn about sex. And also stress, though I don't know if any of us in modern day can get away from stress. So yeah, so that's what the research is showing as far as I see it. But it's kind of missing this deeper piece about the sociocultural aspects. And I'd love to see that more, potentially work on it if I get the chance.
Yeah, amazing. It's a really like complex thing to investigate, isn't it? Because as with so much of this stuff, it's a very like chicken or the egg thing. It's like you're saying, oh, neurotransmitters are implicated. But like there's so many things that might be affecting those neurotransmitters and how they're firing and how, like, yeah, I guess like nature versus nurture pops up in this context all the time. And this is a perfect example. Like, yeah, parents pass on attitudes around periods and bodies and femininity and, the way that we navigate the world, the state of our nervous system, I feel like is so like tied in with so many things that turn into symptoms, but, could be managed or even avoided in the first place if we were kind of brought up in a way where we were really great at regulating our nervous system and we had a lot of like, emotional safety in our formative years. And we just had this kind of like, attunement to our body's needs and our intuition and a total acceptance of the fact that our moods and our energy levels are going to naturally fluctuate throughout the month, rather than feeling as though that's a vulnerability that we have as women that means we can't function in society as effectively as men and we don't, kind of earn the same level of respect or power because we are weaker in that we need to rest more or we have these mood swings that make us crazy or whatever. Like there's all these attitudes around periods and being a cyclical human that I feel like are just so negative and shamey and judgy, and then make us kind of like gaslight ourselves and turn on ourselves and feel as though our bodies are wrong, we're wrong. But I guess imagine if like we were brought up with really regulated nervous systems, even if you have the sensitivity to hormones, you'd probably be able to navigate the fluctuations better. You'd probably be able to remain grounded and not attach negative meaning to those mood swings, but actually have compassion for yourself and go, oh, okay, I actually just know that when I'm feeling like this, I need to do a bit of yin yoga or meditate or go and walk in nature or journal or, you know, just like let myself off the hook for the afternoon and go easy because that's what my body needs in this moment and that is okay. But, you know, we can't really do that if we're trying to succeed and fit into the way, you know, society works in terms of like workplace culture, hustle culture, hashtag boss bitch, you know, all this stuff. So anyway, that was a massive ramble, but I guess where I'm going is like, yeah, it would be so tricky to actually know what is purely physiological or genetic and what is like all of those other factors that we've sort of been talking about having a massive impact. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So how do you see this impacting people's relationships and you know life in general, but I feel like relationally like it's a pretty major thing to navigate, right?
Yeah, I think relationships is one of the areas it impacts most, probably relationships and work, which I hear from others. But relationships can be so many things because both I think we've touched on if someone's in a heterosexual relationship and has a male partner that has never learned anything about the cycle or periods and thinks they're gross and whatever, it's like, could you imagine that partnership when she's being affected by her cycle? Like, even if he's like a loving guy, it's like that's his like deep ingrained attitudes towards it. And I think that can lead to a lot of conflict. Also, this isn't just to like our intimate relationships, but one of the symptoms being like anger or rage, that can cause a lot of issues because if you get those anger or rage feelings and then you might say something you don't mean or do something you don't mean, that in itself can be really terrible in the relationship. But then there's a factor of having regret or guilt about it, and then feeling like you're a bad person. And so it kind of just compounds on itself. So many people say they like can't believe they did that to their partner or said that or had that explosion or like ended a friendship like in their luteal phase, and now they don't feel that way. And so that can be really challenging to work with, that experience in particular. My experience was more so the kind of depressive, sad girl side. And in my previous relationship, I asked my boyfriend, like, what was the hardest part? And he's like, it was so hard to see you so sad. Like, and I do relate to that because I've been in partnership when someone was really depressed, and it was really horrible to like witness someone and know that you like can't necessarily fix them and heal them, but like you just love them and you want to do whatever you can. So yeah, that's a big element. Also, if PMDD does get to like a super severe place, a partner might become more like a caregiver than, than your lover, than your partner in crime type. And I think that dynamic can just be so challenging for both involved.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, I've heard people describe it as like they have a Jekyll and Hyde side of their personality, and it's almost like, yeah, they're not really even themselves anymore. They're acting from a completely irrational, ragey place or depressed place where like, yeah, their entire perception of reality changes so dramatically and so completely that like when they're in it, it's like, this is the reality. There is no other reality. Like it's just like, yeah, scorched earth kind of vibes when it's quite severe. And that must just be so intense, like so difficult to like know that each month there's going to be this time that comes around where your whole personality changes and you potentially like sabotage relationships or your job or your life in some way, and then have this like shame hangover and regret it, and you've hurt people around you or you've hurt yourself, like that is huge. And to then have, like you said, it's like compounded because you feel awful in the moment, and then you feel awful about what you've just done or experienced, and super hard on ourselves as well. And especially if you haven't really got a diagnosis or if you haven't heard of PMDD, like holy shit, like what would you even be thinking is going on? You'd be so confused and scared, really, and not really know if you could even trust yourself when there can be this really drastic change in personality or mood. I can't even imagine like how challenging that is, like day to day, for an individual, and then especially when it comes to maintaining relationships, because that shit's hard enough as it is. Um, yeah, like what are some strategies? Well, okay, hang on. Let's start with like what the mainstream medical system will try to say, like how that's approached. I feel like always, I don't know, but always with this stuff I've found it's like, cool, let's just chuck you on the pill, or let's just chuck some drugs or hormones at you. And all that does with most of these menstrual related things is just mask, like band-aid solution, that shit. So can you talk to me about like, when you're getting diagnosed with PMDD, what is that sort of conveyor belt that you'll now find yourself on in Western medicine, and how effective do you think that is? And then we'll get into like what you've done and how to treat it a bit more holistically.
Yeah. So the mainstream medical treatment pathway would be hormonal birth control up there at the top, kind of right at the same level as SSRIs, antidepressants. You could kind of go either way, depending on what you and your provider feel is best. But a note on the hormonal birth control, which can be not great for people. Other people say it really does help. Some people say that taking it continuously, so skipping the sugar pills, the placebo pills, so then you wouldn't get your period at all, and you would never be kind of withdrawing from hormones, which does make sense why that would be better than having this kind of unnecessary withdrawal from those synthetic hormones. That schedule can be helpful for PMDD. And then also SSRIs have a similar, you can do some nuance with them of taking them kind of the way anyone would take antidepressants, or it could be just in your luteal phase even. And that people might have heard that SSRIs kind of take time to work, but some research shows that in PMDD they work quicker. So if you're just taking it one day, like when your luteal phase starts, it can work right then. So those are options that people, have varying levels of success with, but are absolutely there. And then if those things are tried, and of course, like probably switching several different pills, several different antidepressants, which can be a whole journey in and of itself. There's GnRH agonists, which shut off the ovaries. That's called chemical menopause, basically. And so that's pretty serious, but also it can be reversed. Like if you stop taking them, you could go back to your natural cycle, you could get pregnant, it's not irreversible, but involves injections. And from what I hear, that can be really intense. So I wouldn't just go into that like with, oh, this is going to be great, going to fix it all. Like maybe it could help some people, but it's all of these can also come with the opposite side of it being potentially exacerbated. And then people do go the route of getting surgery to remove their ovaries and usually their uterus as a treatment for PMDD. So they'd remove the natural cycling capability of their bodies. And I do hear that this can be helpful for people, but also it comes with, then you'd have to do hormone add back. So you'd have to take synthetic hormones, and like getting to that balance can be another like challenge, since we know we're already sensitive to hormones. And also that's, super serious. And actually, when I was first getting diagnosed, I went on the internet and it told me about PMDD, and that came up like far too quickly that it should have. And I was like 21 at the time, like very young. I want to have kids someday. Like I was not considering a surgery that would prevent me from having that. And it was, at the time, it was looking like that was the only option. And the only option that actually did anything. Like, and I think that narrative is still kind of out there that that the only way to really get rid of this is to like get rid of it all. And maybe that works for some people. And that probably would be people would be a better candidate for that, like potentially later in their reproductive life. But that was so terrifying, really, that that's an option there, even if it is. And I think I hear people at all levels of these medical treatments actually doing well. I mean, like I say, it can be challenging, but then also I've gone a very holistic route and I'm not currently taking any medications. And I know other women doing the same and they're doing well. So if anyone's listening who has PMDD or thinks they might, like, there really is so much more hope than what I was reading when I was first diagnosed.
Yeah, amazing. And I'd love to like get into that in as much detail as we have time for, because that's the really helpful stuff that gives hope and gives some strategies and tools. Because the friends that I know that got diagnosed, basically, the doctors weren't any help, and it was like your only option is to go on antidepressants or to take the pill, and then the more extreme option is surgery to just remove all of your reproductive organs, and then you have to take hormonal replacement, synthetic hormones, and it's just a whole thing. And so they were like, whoa, what the fuck? And the lesser of those evils felt like, okay, well, I'll just go on the pill then. And then they went off the pill when they wanted to have another kid. That was insanely intense for them. And then they went back. Like, it's not the best if that feels like your only pathway. So can we hear about how you went about treating this more holistically and from a more kind of like somatic and cycle-centered approach? Excuse this quick interruption. I'm shamelessly seeking reviews and 5-star ratings for the potty because, as I'm sure you've noticed by now, it's pretty fab, and the more people who get to hear it, the more people I can help with it. Reviews and ratings actually do make a big difference to this little independent podcaster. And it's really easy to just quickly show your support by taking that simple act of either leaving 5 stars for the show on Spotify, or even better, writing a written review and leaving 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts. Or if you're a real overachiever, you can do them both. That would be mad. If you're writing a review, though, just be sure to use G-rated words, because despite the fact that this is a podcast about sexuality, words like sex can be censored and your review won't make it through the gates. Lame. Anyway, I would personally recommend doing that right now while you remember, just to get on top of it and let me know you're with me on this journey. Thanks, gang. Enjoy the rest of the epi.
Yeah, I was writing down my path before this because it's like, it's not cut and dry. It's not like I take a supplement as my holistic thing. Like, it's not that at all. It was deeper healing. And so the first thing that was a catalyst for me was learning about menstrual cycle awareness, which is just learning how your cycle affects you and really tuning into yourself and then adjusting your life accordingly based on how you feel. And that was just a huge turning point. It's something I never really considered doing. This was a few years ago. So I think it's even more common now and hopefully getting out there. So if anyone's listening has PMDD and wants to maintain their natural cycle, that is absolutely where I'd start. Menstrual cycle awareness and living cyclically.
I've got a couple of episodes on that if anyone's interested as well.
Awesome.
Like it's a whole topic of its own. There's a couple of episodes on the menstrual cycle awareness stuff and cyclical living. So they're old episodes. I started out with those. Go way back and have a listen. But carry on.
Yeah, and one note on that is people with PMDD might think, like, how could that ever help me? Like, I have this super severe experience, but it is still like foundational. And it's a practice. Like, it's going to take you many months, years even. Like, I know that sucks, like when you're just feeling horrible. But it can make such a difference. Speaking of which, if you are in the horrible feeling state, I think like building in more coping skills and kind of survival skills can be really helpful. There's like a therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, which can be helpful for having suicidal thoughts or like extreme kind of explosions. So I would recommend that if anyone is kind of on that more severe end and just needs safety. So then back for myself, after learning cycle awareness and practicing it, I started connecting with my body more in a way I never had, like actually listening to what I felt instead of just calling it everything a disorder, calling everything a symptom. I was like, what do these symptoms mean? And I had a bit of a kind of spiritual moment with myself where I felt like I reopened the connection, the listening to what I felt and being willing to hear her and honor her. And then I also switched my menstrual products, was a kind of a more tangible aspect of honoring my cycles, from, disposable, buying whatever at the store, to cloth pads. And that was a really way to connect with the most tangible sign of my cycle being my bleed. So yeah, I did menstrual cycle awareness, and then I was also on a big journey of learning. I was learning about the history of menstruation, like anthropology of menstruation, of how this thing that in our culture we see as like a nuisance or annoying or like causing horrific pain, or for me, PMDD, that like it wasn't always that way, that in some cultures it's treated differently. And therefore, the way that I treat it in my culture is not necessarily like set in stone, but I can make different choices. And also learning about goddess religions, like that preceding the kind of like patriarchal world we live in, that there was a time when we honored the goddess, and like the Great Mother was the primary deity that was prayed to. And just like, I just can't imagine in that time we would have felt the same way and had things like PMDD in the same way. So that kind of was a permission slip for changing my relationship. And then I had a really pivotal moment when I was thinking about like the Jekyll and Hyde scenario, and it being like two separate selves, not even separate selves, but so many people think of their PMDD self as this total other, this like demon, this one that comes on that isn't you at all. And I don't think I necessarily went to that extreme, but I definitely disliked who I was during my luteal phase, and was scared of that being. And I was thinking about how when we continually other this part of ourselves and hate it, like how could I ever expect it to get better if I just was pouring hatred into myself? And that was huge for me, and was accompanied by kind of like a vision I had of, which is just like in my imagination, just more, it was a kind of connection with my subconscious, I felt like, that delivered messages I needed to hear. And so my vision was of me, a me figure in line with all these other women in this like huge crowd. And like the colors were like red and black. And we were all like facing forward, heads down, like just like marching forward, shackled together. And there was this huge like monster figure behind us. And it was kind of like slime through us. Like all of us were connected to this thing. And in that vision, I kind of woke up and like looked around and saw what this was. And I decided to like step away, to take the shackles off, which was my choice. And to me, that vision, like what that creature was kind of the internalized misogyny that is like riddled through all of us, and that I was a part of perpetuating it for myself, and that I could step away. And when I did that, when I did that in my vision, I remember coming out of that and being like, I'm free. Like I will never experience it in the same way. And that was such a huge turning point, but it also kind of was a catharsis without like any integration or care for this kind of new way of looking at the world. And so I had some like challenges after that, which I had to deal with. And over these last few years, I've really brought on kind of all the support for living my life cyclically and for like supporting my nervous system, like really nourishing my body and caring for myself in like the best way possible. And yeah, so that's kind of what I've done holistically. It's like a whole life reorientation with personal work on beliefs and all that.
Yeah, beautiful. It's just like such a good example of how, the mainstream medical perspective or approach just like really misses so much of the full picture or the story. And I feel like it can really fail women because like we're already pitted against ourselves and each other because of internalized misogyny, because of the patriarchy, and because of like what we've been speaking about in terms of attitudes towards periods and, vaginas being gross, period blood being gross and unhygienic, and expecting our periods to be painful and messy and inconvenient, and ourselves to be like, shittier versions of ourselves when we're PMSing and things like that. It's almost like this self-fulfilling prophecy, like when women already loathe their period and have a lot of challenges around this time, which is really sad. And I feel like some of that totally would be happening anyway, but most PMS symptoms I don't think would have happened in ancient times if we were living more according to how we were designed to. Like so much of it is endocrine disruptors in the air and the water and the food we eat, and this hustle culture that means we're just trying to behave like men and go, go, go and not rest when we need a rest and guilt ourselves about that. And it's just like, yeah, the way that impacts the connection that we have with our bodies and, femininity or womanhood or whatever word kind of resonates with you if you have a vagina. That like self-connection and self-worth is really damaged by the attitudes in society that mean all of us have some degree of internalized misogyny and sort of bias against these things that are like, sort of signature like women's business, quote unquote. And I don't want to be super binary around that. Like obviously, there's all sorts of genders and stuff, but it's just like, yeah, the medical system ignores so much of the water that we're swimming in. And I love that your healing approach started from ground zero and like went right back to like, okay, how do I even feel about like, my body? Am I connected to it? How do I feel about my cycle? Can I actually listen to my body when it's crying out for rest or when it's crying out for some introspective time away from big groups of raucous people? Like, where do I need to put firmer boundaries in place and forsake this, conditioned people pleasing that's expected of women? Like, cycle awareness is just ground zero, I feel like. And then, of course, like the healing around the feminine, the healing around sexuality. Like, there's so much that the patriarchy has to answer for with regards to like the way it's disconnected us from very natural, very innate parts of ourselves and made us feel wrong, and sinful or, filthy or, whatever, out of control about those. Do you find that other women, so say, someone's wanting a bit of a game plan or some strategies to work on their own PMDD, because obviously it's quite individual. People, starting off with like the attitudes they hold and the relationship they have with all of this stuff is going to, change how you approach it. But like, what are some things that are pretty universally helpful that you've found that don't require ripping out your uterus or taking a drug every day, that that we can kind of send listeners off to try?
Yeah. Cycle awareness for sure. Ground zero, catalyst. And also like reading and listening to like kind of a feminine history, kind of that kind of thing, learning about menstruation, reading the books about it. It's when you read other people's words that have perhaps a different perspective, it can get in that kind of deeper subconscious part of ourselves, and it might become our beliefs over time. So I would say just like read a lot and listen a lot to these good things. Nourishment, super important. Like it's the boring stuff of just like eating well, sleeping, moving our bodies, drinking water. But also all of that, I think I'm not like a nutrition professional or anything, but I think it just comes down to like love. Like, are we doing what we're doing out of like love and reverence for like our awesome bodies that do all the things they do? So that's kind of an orientation point for that nourishment. I think reducing our kind of toxin exposure, like the endocrine disrupting chemicals in particular, and totally with our period products, with our shampoos and body wash, with our cleaning products, that I think can be really helpful, not because it's unique to PMDD, but I think is just implicated in like all the health issues going on today. I would say building nervous system supporting practices into our daily life. And that's also like a mindset shift on when I say I'm starting to feel more intensity or not being able to handle things that are happening in my life. Like that's not necessarily like a symptom. That's like my nervous system is needing some support there. Like it's needing myself to go sit in the grass for a minute, to get some sunshine on my face, to like go on a walk, to be in nature, and to just like continually build that into our lives as like an as needed and a all the time kind of thing has been huge for me. I also think healing trauma is big with PMDD, and you can do that's not an easy one, of course, but there's therapy, of course, with that, depending on if it's like a somatic based healing trauma, which is what I've found really helpful. I think, especially with PMDD, because it is like body based related to our cycle. There's also like EMDR and other trauma therapies that, if whatever resonates for people, that can be really huge. And to be selective about what kind of things you read and listen to about PMDD. Like you were saying earlier, there's like self-fulfilling prophecies involved in women's health and life in general. And I think for myself, when I was reading all those really terrifying negative accounts of PMDD, it was affecting my own experience in ways that it was impossible to parse through. So if people are in their experience of PMDD, of course, we want like validation and support groups, but to be a little selective with kind of like the connotation that those groups give can be really helpful.
Totally. Yeah, it's one thing to feel validated in your experience and feel like you're part of a group of people that understand your experience. And it's another thing to like just really wallow in that like, like big circle jerk of self-pity and like, this sucks so much and PMDD is ruining my life and no one else gets it except you guys. And, like the support groups are great, but also we would love them to have like a bit of a sort of positive, proactive flavor, I suppose. And yeah, like a couple of things that you mentioned, I can sort of lead listeners to a couple of resources. I actually have like a cycle tracking chart, which is a PDF that's free. You can get on my website, print it out. I whack it on the fridge every month, and I like manually kind of write my my cycle info and symptoms or whatever in there, so that I have like a hard copy and I can like look at it and interact with it. You can also do that on apps in your phone. And I have a poster called the Menstrual Menu, which I consulted with various, naturopaths, nutritionists, women's health and hormone specialists to create like a bit of a list for the 4 phases of the cycle foods and herbs that are like particularly supportive for that stage of your cycle, so that you can look at the poster in your kitchen or wherever, write a shopping list depending on where you're at in your cycle, and make sure you're eating like a couple of foods from that list that correlate with the stage of your hormonal cycle that you're in, just to like really support your body and nourish your body, with that nutritional element. And it sort of sounds like everything you're saying is like not even that specific to PMDD, but just like living a healthy, regulated life and helping nurture your nervous system and heal your trauma and kind of your relationship with your cycle, regardless of PMDD or not. That's going to be so helpful. My kind of relationship with my cycle, once I got really into cycle awareness and I stopped taking any hormonal contraception and I started tracking my cycle and really like honoring my different needs throughout the month, like I don't get any period pain anymore. I love my period. I love getting my period. It's so chill. But that took work to actually like, listen to my body, track my cycle, figure out when to say no to social things or work and when to rest, and, at what point in my cycle is actually the best time to like do a big clean of my space and do my grocery shopping or like change my sheets or get things kind of teed up so that when I know my hormones will be dropping and I'll have less energy or capacity for that, I've already done it. So just like lots of little tweaks that took ages. Like it takes a long time to like figure this stuff out and learn it, and then learn it for yourself and how it applies to your unique cycle and needs. But it's so helpful just to be in more attunement with your body anyway. And so I find that just like has such a ripple effect. I'm curious, like with your PMDD now, you've gone on a whole journey, you're doing a whole lot of things for it. Like, do you have no symptoms anymore? Do you still have symptoms, but you know how to handle them better? Like, have you noticed the PMDD intensity has lessened? Or is it just that you have a different attitude to it and you have the tools to navigate it when the really intense like mood changes arise?
My whole relationship with it has changed, and I don't really see it as symptoms nowadays for myself. And so I'm actually right at the beginning of my luteal phase right now. And actually yesterday I was feeling a palpable change in my energy. And that's when like estrogen's declining and I consider like energy's declining, expression's declining. And decline sounds like a bad word, but it's really not. And it brought up some feelings, and I literally just like actually acknowledged them and was there with those kind of feelings, and they passed. And now today I feel like a lot better. So how it is for me is more just like these kind of momentary times of challenge. And when I can be with the feelings, it's so much easier. I think this is just in the cycle awareness space that, like in my early luteal phase, I can be more irritable. And sometimes that's caused problems when I'm in a more triggering space, like with my family, as they'll know. So it's about being conscious about what we do in those times and maybe avoiding things that are going to be more challenging for us when we're more sensitive. And then I really allow the emotions to come. And I love to like cry about things and to feel stuff, and in a way that I never did, like in my whole growing up. Like I had such a different relationship with like my emotions because I was sensitive and I was a drama queen and all the things. And yeah, now I love my periods so much. Like I think part of the healing has been loving the thing that comes after the premenstrual time, is that I just know that's around the bend, because right before my bleed starts, it can be kind of a sense of tension and like revved energy with like not energy, but just like kind of tension, angst with nowhere to go. And then it's like the release is coming. And if I feel so different and feel tapped into kind of like my intuition and my inner knowing, I'm like extremely creative on my periods and at other times in my cycle. And that is one thing I also wanted to bring up with like, we know that women with PMDD have a hormone sensitivity or a cycle sensitivity. And it's like perhaps that means we're also sensitive to all like the beautiful aspects of our cycles too, which are like under recognized and talked about. But I think creativity, totally, intuition, our sexuality even, and how that changes and how that can be like a different experience and expression over our cycles. And that's my theory. And I'd love to see that come forward more, because in the PMDD space, I see so many women who are like creatives, who are artists, who are writers, who are painters, who are just all those like creative hobbies and professions. And I feel like that's a part of it too.
Wow. I'd be so interested to know if there was like a correlation there, or that there's more creatives who also have PMDD, and there's actually a superpower associated with heightened sensitivity because it works at both ends of that spectrum. And obviously the challenging end is so much louder and more disruptive and destructive, but maybe that's distracting us from the fact that, and it's so classic with like the whole creative genius, like mental health, like kind of bipolar like archetype, I suppose. The madness of a tortured genius or artist is a trope, maybe for a reason. Maybe there is actually like a lot of people that like have so much range, like both extreme ends of the spectrum, which is fucking challenging. But yeah, that's really interesting. So like what it sounds like is the PMDD for you hasn't gone away, but your capacity to navigate it and your relationship with it has changed, and that makes it way more manageable overall. Or would you say that some of the PMDD quote unquote symptoms have actually gone away or diminished?
Yeah, definitely diminished. But I think at their base, they are rooted in like normal cyclical changes, a lot of them. But my whole relationship to them has changed entirely. And so, I mean, I was at a point where it was debilitating me, and I would like absolutely not say I'm debilitated by these feelings I have now. I know how to navigate them, and I'm like stepping up in my life now in ways I like didn't even think was possible, and if people know that experience, they know what I'm talking about. So yeah, but I think we do want to like get rid of the troubling stuff for us, but that's not really what's found in what I consider healing. That we do have like band-aid solutions, but like I don't want to get rid of my cyclical nature and my emotions and my sensitivity. Of course, I want to like be in less discomfort some of the time, but it's like it's part of life, part of my life, and being a cyclical, sensitive woman.
Well, it would be so unnatural to not have any fluctuations or sort of cycles going on. So yeah, what it sounds like is, on one hand, you've gotten better and better at embracing and navigating those fluctuations, and you've retained the sensitivity while maybe diminishing the negative impact of that on yourself. So just kind of like increased your bandwidth while also kind of lessening the destructive nature of PMDD.
Yeah.
Rad. That's amazing. Fuck yeah.
It's great.
I'm stoked for you. And yeah, it sounds like from anecdotal experience, you've helped other people, and there are other people out there that have taken a similar path of holistic healing and really getting more focused on that like somatic body connection side of it, and they've been on a similar journey to you. The thing is, like with all this stuff, it's not a quick fix, and it does take quite a lot of commitment and work. And often we're coming from a place where we're so fucking dysregulated and there's so much like challenging stuff going on that it's pretty tricky to make healthy decisions. So yeah, do you have any resources or a direction to point people in, maybe support group, maybe, your website or Instagram page, if they want to start on this journey with a little bit of support and scaffolding around them, of like kind of coming to a healed and harmonious place with their PMDD? Hey, me again. If you'd like to support the potty and you've already given it 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, I want to mention that you can buy some really dope merch from the website and get yourself a Labia Lounge tote, tee, togs. Yep, you heard that right. I even have Labia Lounge bathers. Or a cute fanny pack if that'd blow your hair back. So if fashion isn't your passion though, you can donate to my Buy Me a Coffee donation page, which is actually called Buy Me a Soy Chai Latte, because I'll be the first to admit I'm a bit of a Melbourne cafe tosser like that. And yes, that is my coffee order. You can do a once-off donation or an ongoing membership and sponsor me for as little as 3 fat ones a month. And I also offer one-on-one coaching and online courses that'll help you level up your sex life and relationship with yourself and others in a really big way. So every bit helps, because it ain't cheap to put out a sweet podcast into the world every week out of my own pocket. So I will be undyingly grateful if you support me and my biz financially in any of these ways. And if you like, I'll even give you a mental BJ with my mind from the lounge itself. Saucy. I'll pop the links in the show notes. Thank you. Later.
Yeah. So my business is kind of 2-part. We've got our PMDD symptom tracking app, Me v PMDD. So if you suspect that this is what you're going through and you have a lot of psychologically based symptoms, that app can be really helpful, especially in exploring a diagnosis. So it's on the app stores. And then I'm getting into more education and kind of healing modalities through my other platform, Unraveling Cycles, which is unravelingcycles.com. And so we're really just getting started over there. So there's not a ton there, but if you're curious about that, lots more to come.
Amazing. And this actually coincided with PMDD Awareness Month this April, which I had no idea about. We'd booked this in.
Mm-hmm.
I've been wanting to cover this topic for literally years. And it just so happens that the timing has kind of worked out perfectly. So hopefully that means that more people will discover this podcast and you and your work, your body of work as a resource. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up, Brett?
I think we covered a lot of stuff.
Oh my God, wait, we haven't done TMI. Do you have time for a quick TMI story?
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hit me.
Oh.
TMI, we love it. TMI, we love it.
Yeah. Okay. So as people probably know by listening to me, I'm into like connecting with my cycle and with my bleed even. And so that's something I've been exploring lately, is connecting with my actual menstrual blood and painting with it like watercolor. And I told a friend I was doing that, like just kind of off the cuff, and I was rock climbing with her, and then I went and rock climbed and she's like, wait, I need more on that. What do you mean? Like you're painting with your menstrual blood? And yeah, I'm like, I told you everything. That's what it is. Like, what more is there to say? But yeah, I guess what I would say on that, if that sounds intriguing to people, go for it, give it a try. I think with these kind of connection practices, it's not about like that it's going to like fix you or anything, like heal your relationship. It's about exploring that relationship. And it brings up some interesting feelings about like, how do I feel towards my bleed? Like, what can I do with it? People can do whatever they want, but that's where I'm exploring.
Oh, big time. Yeah. And I think like something that happens organically the more you engage and interact with your period blood is that shame gradually releases and has nowhere to hide out when you're behaving in a way that basically screams to the world that you're not ashamed, it's not dirty, it's not gross, you're not afraid of this facet of your reproductive cycle. And I put my period blood on my plants to water them. I have put it on as a face mask, mixed it up with some clay, whacked it on my face. Like sometimes I'll just do a little spot on my forehead and just walk around for the day. If I'm just doing chores at home and I'm on my bleed, I'll just put a bit of period blood on my freaking face, like a little bindi in the center of my, period blood third eye. And like none of that is like totally changing the game. But the fact that I've gotten to a place where I can even touch my period blood, let alone do cute little creative ritualistic things with it is major, and that really, really encourages and reinforces like such a shift in attitude that supports the healing process around this stuff. So I think that's great. I love that. Thank you for that TMI. And I'll put all the links to your work in the show notes. Just really appreciate your time and sharing about your journey with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
And that's it, darling hearts. Thanks for stopping by the Labia Lounge. Your bum groove in the couch will be right where you left it, just waiting for you to sink back in for some more double L action next time. If you'd be a dear and subscribe, share this episode, or leave a review on iTunes, then you can pat yourself on the snatch, because that's a downright act of sex-positive feminist activism, and you'd be supporting my vision to educate, empower, demystify, and destigmatize with this here podcast. I'm also always open to feedback, topic ideas that you'd love to hear covered, questions or guest suggestions, so feel free to get in touch via my website or over on Insta. You can also send me in TMI stories to be shared anonymously on the pod. My handle is FreyaGraf_the Labia Lounge, if my account hasn't been deleted for being too sex positive, which, is always a possibility with censorship. But just in case the chronic censorship finally does obliterate my social channels, I'd highly recommend going and joining my mailing list and snagging yourself some fun freebies for the trouble at www.freyagraf.com/freebies. Anyway, later, labial legends. See you next time.